Hello folks, it is time to end the week with me sitting on my throne as I usually do, waxing lyrical about some hobby nightmares, and today I thought it would be prudent at the end of the week to finish off Mads' stories because she sent in quite a few that have gone on during her extensive time within the hobby, and I thought, you know what, why don't we dedicate an episode to it to make sure that we finish off the email that she sent. It was very well written and it had several stories in there that were quite entertaining. So, if you like what I do, like the video, it does wonders for me in the algorithm. Let's march on and do some hobby nightmares, shall we, before I get back to marking my essays so that I'm ready for the weekend. Right. This one covers a Jensen that Mads wants to talk about. So, you might be thinking, says Mads, Madeline, surely of all people you just mentioned, there cannot be somebody worse. Yeah, if you didn't know that we've been reading out her stories or her nightmares for the past week and a bit, well, every now and again we've been reading one of her stories, so yes. Could there be anybody worse than people in the last sessions? I don't think so, but let's jump in. I wish it was not the case, but here it goes. Let's call him Jensen. Mostly because he is, in fact, the worst player I have come across, and because nobody I knew actually knew his name. I'm sure some did, but most just called him, oh, that guy? What a douche. Okay. Jensen was not well liked, despite the fact that hardly anybody even knew about him. He suffered a bad case of antisocial behaviour and just could not seem to pick up on any social cues or tableside manners. In Local Game Store 2, that we covered in our last nightmare, there was an attempt at an active gaming community run by a few regular members of our group, who would later give up on the idea altogether. The gaming group had survived, moving several stores and even a merger of another group into their community. But trying to keep the group alive at Harry's local game store was a bridge too far for the group's leadership, and they just decided to give up. They meant well, but too many factors were against them. They were the ones behind big events, such as narrative campaigns for 40k and Warhammer Fantasy, D&D events that crossed over into each other's campaigns, and even massive apocalypse events for 40k. Dude, if you have these people in your store, build your store around them. You will have more customers than you know what to do with. I'm serious. They'd pride themselves on being as inclusive as possible, but admittedly struggled with pleasing people and people not showing up or committing to a basic organisational structure. Yeah, this is where positive gatekeeping comes in. One such event was a massive battle based on the Storm of Chaos book. The one where Kyle and I joined up with the Chaos factions to stave off the alliance of good. It would be a fight of good versus evil, where the evil side had just taken over a fortress and the good side had arrived too late to stop it. We were outnumbered, but we were given the majority of the hills and the fortress on our side, while the good side were given way more points to assaulters and waves. If the side of good could take the fortress and get rid of our general, Crom the Conqueror, they would win the game. If the evil side could outlast 6 turns, then we would win the game. As it was explained that Archeon's warhost would arrive after that and slaughter the side of good if they hadn't taken the fortress already. We were initially supposed to be the attackers, but we all lacked the models and points to field anything, so we became the defenders instead. A good excuse as any to put a fortress on the table, I guess. The special terrain was made and painted, armies were assembled, and there was even talks about sending in our results to Games Workshop after the game was over to partake in the Storm of Chaos global event. Dude, I miss those days. One of the best White Dwarfs I ever got was about the Storm of Chaos event. Ah, man. It was a Friday night. I was going to Games Workshop the next day with the lads. You know, got home from school, went to the shop, saw a White Dwarf in a normal newsagent, got it, came home, read it cover to cover on a Friday night whilst listening to a Foo Fighters CD. Shows you what kind of, my music taste has changed quite somewhat since then. But still, man, those were good days. Good days. All of this has been planned by the community leaders. Whilst positioning up, we got to decide who got to place their armies opposite the other table players. As we were defending, and at almost half of the good side's points, we got to go second so we could potentially counter-deploy. We only had one siege weapon on our side, a single hell cannon in our general's army. If it was decided that our general and his forces would naturally take the fortress to keep the general safe and so that his cannon could be placed on the walls. We would be facing off against High Elves, a Wood Elves army, at least 2 Empire players and a Dwarf army, all packing multiple long-ranged units like cannons, bolt throwers and so forth. Now, I did not know Jensen at the time. This was my first time even seeing the guy, let alone speaking to him. He was a skinny guy of around 19, with glasses and spiky hair, and seemed to be dressed rather normally for a young man in the 2000s. He brought along his dwarf army and, oddly enough, he was positioned as at the far end of the table, away from the fort and his allied armies, which struck me as kind of odd, but hey, what did I know? I was just a dumb kid at the time. I was just glad I had my orc regiments on the field with my Black Orcs and Grimgor, some normal boys, a chariot, archer boys, and a giant. I believe I was trying up the Ard boys list at this time. That's pretty much all I had to begin with. But what followed was an absolute clown show. Jensen brought with him crossbowmen, gunners, several cannons, organ guns, flame cannons, bolt throwers, stone throwers, and an anvil of doom. All ranged, all the time, nothing melee. And roughly doing the numbers today, he must have had special privileges to bring this army because otherwise it would not be legal. Jensen refused to start deploying his army unless he was given a specific series of mountains and hills, which had not previously been placed on the table. He claimed he was promised by one of the officials, and he had specifically built his army around this piece of terrain advantage. The terrain in question could be built up so that his entire army could be deployed in tiers, without one layer obstructing the views of the others, meaning that his entire army could be fielded and shoot at us, me and Kyle, on turn 1, and continue to do so until nothing is left on our side. The terrain was brought in, and Jensen's move shifted almost instantly, gleefully deploying his dwarves onto the plateau, remarking with an almost giddy tone about how much shooting he was going to do against mine and Kyle's orcs. Wow. Just deserved as well, he remarked. You could see him visibly shaking in anticipation. It was almost disturbing, as if he hadn't eaten anything in a day or two. Like, very noticeable shivers and twitches. Okay. Jensen had several nervous tics. He would scratch himself or embrace himself, giving himself a hug, if he had to wait. He would stamp his feet with a twitching leg as well. He would adjust his glasses, or otherwise fiddle with a ruler, just to have something going on with his hands. Dude, he's autistic. He's autistic. It's painfully obvious. Like, you know, it's not even close. He had a noticeably wide mouth and big jaw and large teeth. If Jensen smiled, he would show off his entire set of teeth with an open mouth, and I'd swear if he'd smile any wider, his face would start to tear. He would smile often, accompanied by a very audible and prolonged chuckle. Pretty much every time he'd said something about the game, or every 20 seconds, even if nobody had said anything. This guy, like, listen, you know, the one thing I really like about my autistic fans, I'm not calling you all autistic, by the way, these are the guys who have autism who actually watch me, is that they're very, very, very good at just saying like, you know, even with autism, that guy's weird. Do you know what I mean? I love that. Like, the fact that they always call it out before I ever have to. They're always like, yeah, you know what? I know a lot of people who are autistic. That dude's just a weirdo. Like, that dude's just a very strange little snowflake. And that's just how it is. And I think this is one of those times. If you have autism, if you are autistic, let me know in the comment section down below. Is this one of those times? Anyway. As if he was just laughing to himself. Each time, it looked like he was in pain as well, though clearly he was enjoying himself. He would turn red as time went on and veins would start to show on the sides of his forehead, yet he was genuinely giddy about the whole affair. As a young teen, it was all very unsettling. There was just something wrong with him, as if he was not really a person, but as something. I get what you mean, it's uncanny. It's like an alien trying to act like a human, I know what you mean. I know how this sounds, but when I look back on those memories, it was just all so surreal. Jensen would roll his dice, shoot his shots, his cannon, his anvil, bolts, and so forth, with such maniacal pleasure that he would even clap his hands in the air as if to give himself a high five, and would even audibly comment on his own performance, telling himself about a job well done. You tell you what, they're only in the hobby, right? It's one of them hobbies. Meanwhile, the rest of the table was dealing with their own struggles. It was just me and Kyle against the dwarves' guns and trying to figure out just what the actual heck was going on. Neither of us had ever gone up against Jensen before or even met him, and even Kyle, who was normally so animated at the table when playing his knights, was now visibly weirded out and felt awkward about the whole ordeal. Tableside manners aside, Jensen seemed to have an incredible rolling streak on his side of the table for the first 2 turns. Out of everything he brought, only 2 or so gunners missed their shots, everything else hit and wounded our side of the table. Oh no. That's not good. After turn 2, Kyle and me basically resigned to our fate and were starting to think we had just been placed against Jensen as literal cannon fodder to keep him busy on a busy afternoon. It didn't help that we were told to hold our ground on the first 2 turns either by our general, so we could act as a flanking charge against enemies trying to get to the gate, but we were positioned on a hill without any cover in full range of the dwarves. As it happens, one of the Empire players was having a rough time against the Chaos player, but genuinely having fun. He happened to look over to our side of the table and asked how things were going, and to his shock, he heard how good Jensen was rolling and started asking more and more questions, till he, and the referee, ended up forcing Jensen to roll his dice in a supplied dice tray in the middle of the board so everybody could see his rolls. Turns out, he was rolling behind his massive terrain piece the entire time, and we just accepted his rolls on good faith. Jensen suddenly started to roll a lot more reasonable rolls for, no reason whatsoever, but this did seemingly sour his mood a little. He was still chuckling and laughing to himself about after every roll and shot fired, and would still claim quite a bit of casualties however, even with, things being evened up. So, I'm just going to say something here. Acquiescing to Jensen with his own little piece of scenery is probably only encouraging this kind of behaviour. I'm hesitant to go too far into Jensen here and have a real go at him, because I'm quite aware that there must be something else going on in his mind and in his mental health and his general mental illness, you know what I mean? But, I think this is one of those times where we're like, yeah, do you know what's happened here? This fellow Jensen obviously has outbursts due to his condition, right? And instead of being given the chance to be normal by being scolded for those things and told not to do them anymore, people just try to appease him to avoid the meltdowns. And that's not how you deal with things like this in the long term. You know what I mean? Anyway. We were shown massive templates and were told that his Anvil of Doom had scored X amount of runes without telling us we could even dispel that or not. A small dispute came up when it came to firing one of his weapons. He mentioned he would now be shooting his closer range weapons on a marching unit, as it was now exactly within his weapons range, he proclaimed. When asked how he knew that, as in 6th edition if memory serves, It was not allowed to measure distances during play, and he simply had to guess before declaring the ranged attack. Wow, okay. I didn't know that. Jensen deadpan replied that he had measured the entire field before the game started and made notes on paper about how far everything was, and that there were no rules in the game that forbade him from doing so. He simply shrugged and continued the game. The worst part of all, Jensen had a habit of touching other people's models. Okay, we crossed the line. We crossed the line. This guy's now getting a slap in the face if he does that to my model. Sorry. Even at times accidentally breaking bits off. The guy would roll and kill so many of our side that it would at times take too long before his patience ran out, and they would physically remove the models he just killed by walking over to our side and doing so, either picking them out of a unit or flicking a single model of ours over on its back towards our side whilst making a gunshot noise. Yeah, he's getting a slap. Sorry, he's getting a slap. At worst, he would simply grab hold of a group of minis with one hand, like a claw machine, lift them up and lazily drop them to the side of the table, close to the edge, so he could continue his merry way on firing his on units. Laughing his goddamn ass off as he did so. His excuse was so that the game could progress quicker. He would shoot, kill models, laugh to himself, congratulate himself, or tell himself that those orcs are now dead, and move them to the side on his own as if we weren't even there. We didn't even exist to him anymore. We were just machines to move our units closer to him so we could kill them. The first time this happened, nobody but me and Kyle saw it happen. The next time, he got reprimanded by both the table and the referee. But when he grabbed hold of my unit of metal black orcs with my Grimgore in it, which he thankfully did not have to remove, yeah, it's Grimgore, of course he didn't, I just went pale in the face with both fear and rage. My heart sank as he set them down, and I heard the metal clink into each other and chips of paint fly off my miniatures. Kyle saw this happen and finally lost his cool, complaining to our general, who thankfully now also saw it happen. At that point, our table had already run late, and I knew my parents were outside waiting for me for the last 10 or so minutes. I asked if I could just pack up and leave, as I'd had enough. I simply couldn't handle it anymore. I couldn't even look at my minis out of fear that something had broken. Weeks later, I heard that Jensen was a known figure by the community leaders, who had come over after the merger of the two gaming groups in our city. He was already severely disliked for his antics in the other group, and thought he could try his luck in the newly combined group at our local game store. He just wanted to roll dice and kill stuff. That was always his excuse. In order to do that, however, he would nag, cry, and manipulate organisers into giving him special treatment and privileges. Other players who knew him were wise of this and just opted to not play against him, even going as far as to ignore his efforts to join local events or ignore his existence altogether. Our Empire player that day knew of him and his antics, but never actually played in a game with him before. He was a vocal supporter of getting Jensen excluded in the new group as well, and I at least never saw our Jensen again. The results of our game, I hear, were never submitted to Games Workshop, as it was an enormous, terrible show. But rather than our organisers blaming themselves or the players for a lack of communication, or handling in their army list on time, or even finishing the game, yes, that was never even completed, or a plethora of reasons why the game failed, all blame was placed on Jensen and his antics in an attempt for the community to save face. Despite this, everybody agreed on this being the best course of action, and everybody was happy with it. Well, I kind of feel bad for him. I'm pretty certain that this guy's just got some issues here. Do you know what I mean? Anyway, I ended up having to touch up some Black Orcs. Did you? And learned afterwards that varnish spray is a bitch and a half to use properly, as using too much messes up your paint job. Yeah, it's a very light one spray. You know what I mean? Very light, not like a normal spray. Anyway, on to the final part of our tale: local game store 2 3/4. I would like to add that I don't consider myself to be any kind of saint, especially at the age of 11 to 16 like I was in these tales. But after spending so much time with Roy and Steve at the local game store, it seemed their behaviours were rubbing off on me as well. If you don't know about Roy and Steve, go and watch the last few Hobby Nightmares, they do come up. After taking a friend along to the local game store for a day, they had made it abundantly clear to me that I was acting in a way that they had never seen me do before, and disliked who I was around these people. As if I was massively stressed out, or in a constant need to try and verbally defend myself. Dude, I've been around people like that, who bring that out of you, because you're always fighting a... Listen, I'm going to be quite personal here, right? I love my mother. Absolutely adore her. Think she's wonderful. But, we did argue a lot when I was a child. And even when I was into my late teens, 20s, and even towards my 30s, right? Because we had to live in the same place over the pandemic, and we didn't get along very well during the pandemic, put it that way. And my sister, I love her to bits, but she has always pretty much been the favourite. And I'm not salty about it, by the way. It's just as it was. It's just how it was. Right? And she was treated like, the sun shone out of her backside, that kind of a thing. And I was always wrong, essentially. So I was very used to fighting my corner. Very used to it. I was very used to having to defend any point that I ever made, ever. And when I got with my with a partner from a few years ago, who I went to the States with eventually, she would always say that when I was around my mother and my family, I was a different person. I was very defensive, very combative, and I was and they seemed to be exactly the same way. Do you know what I mean? At least my mother did, anyway. And her partner, it was very much like that. It was me against them, sort of verbally. Nothing serious, just all the time. It's very adversarial. But it was normal to us. And there's a few times where she pulled me aside and was like, listen, do they always talk to you that way? And I'm like, well, yeah. She's like, yeah, that's not on. I don't like that at all, And even when I went to the States, I wouldn't upset people, but, like, her family found me very loud. Not loud, but like, very at it all the time. And eventually through therapy, when I came back to the UK, when that relationship ended, I went to therapy, got things sorted out, calmed down a lot. And even now, I'll have flashpoints now and then when I get annoyed at something, or, like, something will jump out of my mouth, like, But it happens a lot less often now. I'm in a good relationship where I'm very calm, for the most part. But I have been around people who bring this out of you. That you're always trying to defend yourself, and you're always trying to defend your hill. It's exhausting, man. It's exhausting. Get the hell away from that situation. Because if you're like me, and those are the closest people to you in your life as well, you'll probably get on a lot better once you're not around them all the time. It's this what it is. My friend also suggested that I distance myself from these people for my own benefit. I did for about a month or two, and I noticed I felt better about myself, and I never visited that specific local game store again. I'm happy to say it has improved my overall conduct with people and made my life better for it. Though it also meant that Warhammer was pretty much altogether too much for me to partake in anymore. There's nothing wrong with admitting that, dude. It's a very adult thing to do. And with the onset of Age of Sigmar, the hobby just felt dead to me. My drive was gone, as all I could do was feel mentally drained to even pick up a brush anymore. It would take nearly 10 years for me to pick up the hobby again, to start painting and gaming in my own time, and with actual good-natured people to share my interests with. This has helped me with my burnout, and getting my vigour back to starting my own company, and even sharing my work and health exercises as a streamer/VTuber, so I can help other people. The only thing that kept me in touch with the hobby during this time were YouTube lore channels like Arch Warhammer, novels, and PC games. Lads, by the way, lads, I did say in the last video, let the lads know in the comments if you're single, and she is. So, comment away. Begin wooing. Show us what you got. Woo away. Roy and Steve, as I mentioned before, had also tremendously changed for the better over the years, as employment and time apart from each other seemed to do them both good in the long run. I'm telling you now, Mads, life has kicked them in the balls and improved their behaviour. I'm telling you now. Steve can still be a know-it-all, especially about politics. Ugh. But he has since reflected and acknowledged the fact that he was an absolute pain in the teens and has somewhat tried to make amends for it. I had heard that the local game store had closed down, however, and had opened up someplace else, which was surprising at the time. Not that it closed, but rather that it had moved to another spot. Around the age of 20 to 21, I was already a forever dungeon master for Pathfinder and D&D, and after a friend's suggestion, I decided I may as well pick up some dice and check out the new place. Frankly, it was the only place I knew that was still open at this point. The new address led me to and a friend to a normal house in the middle of the living area. Ringing the doorbell, I was let in automatically and entered a living room with barely any light, jam-packed full of boxes and display racks full of paints and Warhammer kits. This is so weird. Harry greeted me. That is our obese manager from the last Hobby Nightmares. Harry greeted me, commenting at how much I'd grown up. He'd even lost a bit of weight as well. I told him I wanted some dice, and he said to follow him to the paint area and payment counter. I followed him with my friend in tow, and was led into a very small kitchen area where more boxes were placed, a fridge with ice cream and drinks, and a small eating table full of paints and people painting. To my surprise, Bob was there as well. Again, a figure from our previous Hobby Nightmare, who was generally one of the most unpleasant people I think I've ever read about, being honest. Greeting me with a grump and asking what I was doing there. Harry happily said I was buying something and I should be left alone. I picked up a small box of dice which had one of everything in it for D&D, and was then pressed on the fact that I should get more D20s at the very least, or an extra set of dice, just in case I needed to roll a lot of things at once. They should be green, said Bob, because they bring good luck. I ended up getting guilt-tripped into buying a box of Orc Boar Boys. My friend was on the hook for 2 sets of dice, a single green dice, and a box of something Lizardmen related. I left that place with a sour feeling, never to return again. I now go to a gaming hall with friends only, or play online on TTS, Tabletop Simulator, exclusively. I'm happy to say that now at least I find myself in a more positive environment, surrounded by casual players, and people who are genuinely interested in the hobby, and are simply happy to share their interests and help others out in a constructive and wholesome way. Sure, there are some rotten eggs in a group of over 100 players, but the community is wise enough to correct these people early on as to not scare off new members, and more importantly, make young members feel safe and welcome at all times. Thank you for reading all of these. I think I can get you a few more stories, but these were the ones that came to mind the most. Thanks, Mads. Cheers, thank you very much for sending those in. If you know anybody who could teach me how to play old school Warhammer on Tabletop Simulator, that would be pretty cool, because that's something I've always wanted to do, is get into fantasy. You know, and I've got lots of fantasy miniatures, so I need to be using them at some point. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, folks. I love you a long time. I'm going to get up out of my throne now, because it's getting, I think my backside's gone to sleep. But I love you all. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll speak to you soon. Have a good one. Bye now.